Good day, everyone. I am Professor Shahid from International Medical University, Malaysia, and I was given the task to talk in this certificate course on research and medical writing, organized by the AJKMC, SIVU, and UHS as a joint program, and I delivered this synchronous session, took synchronous session with you all on 23rd of December. But while I was talking to you all, in the chat box message was received that it is less understood through the text that I was talking about. So I switch over to take the data on an Excel sheet and explain to you all the process, how the validation is done in a questionnaire-based survey. But the overall the task given to me was to give an overview of the quantitative research from its perspective of the research design, and our focus was surveys design as educational research. And as we all know, research design is an overall systemic plan to implement and analyze the study to answer a research question or test an hypothesis. Now, the research design, as we all know, involves decisions regarding intervention, comparison, data collection, time and setting, and how to control the impact of the extraneous variables. And if we talk about the quantitative research design as the data collection instrument, then survey is one of the most widely used non-experimental or descriptive type of research design. So the other two descriptive research design may be observational study or the case study. From here, we moved on to the validation of the questionnaire in a survey, and that was the primary task for me to deliver in a synchronous session, and that I'm going to continue here as a voice-over recorded lecture for the convenience of all of the participants. As far as the task given to you, were three tasks were given, and later I received the request that the task has not been solved by many of you, so I had to provide a model answer, and then I demonstrated in my last synchronous session how to do one of those tasks, which was about the scatter plot. So from here onward, I'm going to take the questionnaire-based survey, questionnaire design, development, and validation process. So basically, I'll be talking in this today's voice-over recorded lecture in context of the validation process of a questionnaire in a survey. Now, a bit about the historical background. Questionnaire or inventory is an important tool of survey-based research, which is widely used in educational research. And there are many tools that can be used to record the people's opinion on a given questionnaire, which may comprise a number of items which has to be validated before it is used as a data collection instrument. So the questions remain the most important items to know what people explicitly feels and think, and they can give their opinion after the questionnaire is administered to them. Continuing on historical background, the first recorded questionnaire was developed and used centuries back by Adolphe Quetelet, a French polymath, in 1835. Years back, right? Applied to the natural science and invented the field of sociology. The questionnaire, yet to be fully understood, has been employed in survey research, mostly as an educational research, but due to its extraneous work of validation process and the expertise to do it, often this survey has been questioned for its validation. So if it is, the questionnaire is used in a survey, the questionnaire is used for data collection, it must be validated. So that's the most important aspects. Otherwise, any instrument collected on an unvalidated questionnaire would not have the same weightage, and perhaps for publication reasons also, the first question would be, is the questionnaire used in this research for the data collection instrument has been validated or not? To overcome the difficulties encountered and to create and conduct research using questionnaire, this talk would rather be presented as a demonstration, which I might use after the certain slides. I might use the data on Excel sheet to explain as I have explained it in synchronous session. But first, you all have to understand the validation of a questionnaire in research involves multiple steps from its inception of creative idea, when you simply have created an idea that you want to collect data through a survey procedure. The design, development, and validation of that questionnaire becomes the most important part of the research. So the validation process of a questionnaire is an extended procedure before a questionnaire is accepted and used for data collection. Model will be used here to describe such each aspects of the validation in friendly user manner, but my focus would be, because it's a big subject, can't be covered in an hour or 45-minute voiceover lecture, but what I will do is that I will try to make it, the validation process will be our focus, which I'll try to make user-friendly in a manner that you are encouraged to actually develop your questionnaire and validate the items included in the questionnaire. As you can see here, the validation in a validation model, the validation process is a long process from the first creation of the items to its validation, and it involves not only the validity but reliability process as well. So once the questionnaire items are created, to do so, the literature sourcing is used of the existing questionnaire on the same topic area. The key attributes is extracted. Items are generated but not copied down from the published material. It has to be one own items in own language. However, the literature sourcing can be used to be, to compare and be guided for its simplicity, language, and clarity. So the item refinement by the experts panel is done at local level, and formatting of the questionnaire for item or the variable design, once approved by the local panel. The validity process involve the experts' feedback. So the items are sent out to the experts, and especially for relevancy and clarity, and this is called content validity, CVI, content validity index by the experts for the relevancy and clarity. Face validity by the experts for its language and simplicity is also accounted for, and the opinion is sought on that from the experts as well. So the reformatting of the questionnaire items after having received it from the experts for CVI or the content validity index is calculated, and if it meets the requirement, then the pilot study is conducted from the subjects of the same vicinity, where the full-blown study has to be conducted. But for this pilot study, number has to be significantly, statistically significant number, and the concept is that for each item, 5 subjects should be taken into study. So after the pilot study, the connotation and the re-evaluation of the questionnaire item is done by the local panels, and then full case study embarkation is done with the high number, statistically significant number, which is calculated as per the research design, and the findings and the data analysis for reliability process is then taken over. And this reliability is done through the correlation coefficient, which should be 0.3 onward, and Cronbach alpha acceptable at 0.7. If the data is normally distributed, the correlation is the Pearson's correlation. If normality distribution is in question, then Spearman correlation is performed. Then we also take into account the factor analysis, principal component analysis is used, and this basically would also be looking at the construct of validity, that the items, if they are distributed among different factors or the components by the initial researchers' plan, that has to be confirmed through the principal component analysis from the component matrix and the rotation matrix, and expert panel decision after the after the principal component analysis decisions come, and it may not be the same component and factor which has been earlier created by the researchers. So this is very important, and this will determine the construct validity. An item may move from one component to another, and even the number of the component can increase or decrease as the situation may be. After this is the usability, and this usability recommendation can be the descriptive statistics or the regression statistics. In descriptive, we take the mean and standard deviation, and then in regression study, once done, it depends, but mostly we rely on the mean and standard deviation. But there is a way to draw conclusion from the mean and standard deviation. Formula has to be used, but this talk will basically will be about the validation process or content validity index, and then the conclusion is drawn, APA reporting and interpretation is made. Looking at the measurement scale of the questionnaire, in a survey-based research, data is collected using a questionnaire with multiple items. So the option used is either dichotomous measure of the yes or no, or a Likert scale is used. If a Likert scale is used, 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 is used, where 1 represents strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 agreed, and 4 represent strongly agree. In between, we might put as not sure or uncertain opinion by the subjects. The participant survey are directed through an instruction to indicate their level of agreement. It is well explained to them before it is administered to them. The statement or the items in combination reveal the specific dimension or the construct or the component of the factor which initially is determined by the researcher, and then principal component analysis will confirm this, whether the item belongs to the same construct as initially designed, or they move from one construct to another depending on how the subjects have responded. Now, talking about the validity and reliability of the questionnaire, the reliability refers to the consistency of item in questionnaire and its reproducibility. Like an assessment question, if it has to be looked for its reliability, assessment administered a second time after weeks or months gap or year gap should produce the same result if it has to be considered reliable. So reproducibility is one aspect of the reliability. So same applies to the questionnaire. The validity of questionnaire can be explained as the extent of the questionnaire, at the extent of the questionnaire measure what it is intended to measure actually. So if the item is used for in a construct, in a factor, in a component to measure certain aspect of the characteristics, for example, the confidence, the knowledge, or the skills, so it should measure that. And that's called the validity. So phase in the content validity is achieved through the content validity index, where a group of experts involved in reviewing, analyzing the items, and there's a method used once the experts respond. In terms of 0 to 100, their relevancy and clarity would be indicated by reading those items and looking at what this questionnaire is overall meant for or looked for. So each item in that context will be measured by the experts. And then content validity index process, which I'll explain in a moment, will calculate the content validity index of each item. The construct validity is achieved through the principal component analysis as part of the factor analysis that I have explained earlier, but this is not the part of today's talk, because it's altogether a different subject area to be discussed and needs an elaborative session for that. So the reliability of this questionnaire is established after administering the test, and the data collected is analyzed for Pearson and the Spearman correlation coefficient and the Cronbach alpha, either using Excel or SPSS software. If Likert scale is primarily used, it will require validation using content validity index and a factor reduction technique called the factor analysis as the principal component analysis. That basically will be for the construct validity. For the content validity, we look for the content validity index as the expert's opinions comes on the relevance and clarity of the items to the theme or the construct determined as the individual CVI or individual content validity index, and the other would be the SCVI. SCVI then will have two components, SCVI average and SCVI universal. I'll talk about this in a little while in detail, and if the time permits, I will also use one of the data to explain, as I have done in synchronous session. In PCA or principal component analysis, initial extraction and subsequent rotation identify the factor with their respective item, which may not be the same as the researcher has designed. So principal component analysis, the data for initial extraction and subsequent rotation would identify factor with their respective items as it is responded by the subject. So it might be different from what has been assumed or what has been perceived by the researcher. So the content validity index is determined in terms of in this example here we have taken the item sent out to the experts to give their opinions for each item. For example, here you can see there are 10 items and 6 raters are used as an experts to give their opinion about each on a Likert scale of 1 to 4. So 4-point Likert scale has been used. 1 is not relevant, 2 is somewhat relevant, 3 is quite relevant, and 4 is highly relevant. So once they give their rating, then this mathematical calculation is used to determine the content validity index, which is degree to which an instrument has appropriate sample items for the construct being measured. And this is measured in terms of individual CVI of each item and the sample CVI of all the items. So for the ICVI, or the individual content validity index, individual item is CVI is the ICVI is the individual item proportion of content proportion of the content experts giving a relevant rating of 3 or 4. So 3 or 4 is considered in agreement. So that will be taken down, and then I'll show you how, and as I have already explained using data on Excel sheet to you all during the synchronous session, how this CVI, individual and sample, is calculated. For SCVI, content validity of the overall sample determined as an average of the I. So first we determine individual CVI, and average of that become SCVI. The SCVI, the sample CVI, is further has two further output, which can be SCVI universal average and SCVI average. So the sample CVI average is the average of the ICVI for all the item on the scale, whereas the SCVI universal is difficult to achieve, but if one achieve it, it tells about very high quality of content validity index of the questionnaire, and it is the proportion of items on a scale that achieves a relevance rating of agreement, fully agreed by all the experts involved, and their opinion given on a 4-point Likert scale. This one is not part of today's discussion, because principal component analysis is altogether a different kind of step taken in validity of the questionnaire, but you can see here, as we started with 3 construct, or the 3 factor of the component, but when we ran the principal component analysis using the same data, we found that there has been more than 3 factor determined by the principal component analysis in the extracted components, and then in the rotated components clearly determines 4 components, not 3. So we have to rule. So researcher have to re-look into their original plan of 3 construct or the component or the factor, but all the items were not found relevant to the construct, that initial design, and this could have been 4 or even if you start with 3, it can be less than 3 or even more, as determined by the principal component analysis, but this requires altogether another workshop perhaps. Now let's look into the research design from the survey, questionnaire-based survey perspective. So the research design has 3 basic flavor of being exploratory, descriptive, and explanatory, depending on the intent of the researcher. So the exploratory design aims to explore an area that one knows nothing or have very little knowledge about it. In descriptive design research, a researcher wants to describe further with accuracy about the something one already knows. In explanatory research, researcher want to explain causal predictive relationship among the variables. So the experimental research, survey research, comparative case study, observational action research, or mixed method research all fall under one of these 3 research designs. And now let's talk about the Likert scale in a questionnaire. If Likert scale is used, it is used to measure the opinion of varying degree on a 4 or 5-point Likert scale from one extreme to another. Is the most common method of developing the Likert scale. The scale was first developed in 1932 by a social psychologist, Francis Likert, who used this scale for identifying a person's perception and opinions. The scale developed to choose options that best support the participant's opinion, from the strongly agreed to strongly disagreed, and in between you may have an uncertain situation like this, not sure and uncertain. In a qualitative research, items are assigned a numerical value to make it a quantitative measure for the interpretation, because remember, the Likert scale is qualitative to start with, but we assign numbers and then we decode those options of the Likert scale into numbers, and those numbers are then used in a specific mathematical calculation to draw the mean. So the Likert scale data can be analyzed to use mean and standard deviation to describe a scale as an outcome, and then interpretation can be made for decision making. Now let's talk about the validation process from step 1 to step 6, and after step 6 the instrument will be ready for use by the researchers, and this already has been utilized for the pilot study, and after the pilot study in step 7 the questionnaire is revised after receiving the experts review engage in setting up the questionnaire. So first step would be establish the phase and the content validity reviewed by the panel of experts, and this is the focus of this talk today. Then second is to run a pilot test with reasonable number of the subjects, and the principle is for each item at least use 5 subjects. Literature have agreed 5 to 10, but minimum 5 must be used for each item. Say for example your questionnaire comprises of 20 items, then 100 subjects must be used in any undertaking of the questionnaire using the subjects. Step 3 would be the cleaning of the data collected using Microsoft Excel and SPSS, and for construct validity we apply factor analysis using principal component analysis to determine the construct, which may be the same or may deviate from the original planned by the researchers. So step 5 would be check internal consistency using appropriate statistical method in SPSS, which is Pearson's correlation coefficient and the Cronbach alpha. So as I said earlier, finally the experts will revise the survey after receiving the experts review, engage in setting up and the outcome of the pilot study. So the tuning is done to the questionnaire, and it is considered validated and can be used for data collection by the authors who have designed it, or later if you publish, anybody can use it with the permission of the author. So the most important is the content validity, and to determine content validity we measure the content validity index, which is the first thing to define the construct. And so first thing is to define the construct, and then in relevance to the construct each item is opined by the experts about the relevancy. So the first thing is to define the construct and develop the item to measure the construct. So CVI is the degree to which the instrument has appropriate sample item for the construct being measured, and there can be multiple construct of the components within a questionnaire. A questionnaire may have one component and one factor as well. It determines whether the items adequately represent the domain of the content addressed by the instruments. So CVI is evaluated through individual content validity index and the scale related or SCVI after the collection of the experts' response on Excel format. And then as I said earlier, the scale related or SCVI is has further 2 components, and it is determined by further 2 different calculation as SCVI average and SCVI universal average, using different formulas. Now determining the ICVI or the individual CVI and the sample CVI. ICVI measures the efficacy of the item as the proportion of the experts giving an item relevance rating of 3 or 4, which is considered an agreement. in a 4-point Likert scale. And we count down those agreement, which is 3 or 4, and then we divide it total number of the raters, so that determine the ICVI, and it determines the total agreement on item divided by the total number of the experts. So the SCVI, or the scale CVI, measures the efficacy of the scale in toto as the content validity of the overall sample. So the average of the overall sample determine the SCVI, which is further divided into 2. The 2 component of the scale CVI average is the average of the ICVI for all the items in the scale in a construct is one of the criteria of the questionnaire validity. The SCVI universal agreement is the proportion of items on a scale that achieves a relevance rating of 3 or 4 by all the experts in a 4-point Likert scale, which I'll explain later with example. So it is a conservative approach, and it's very useful index of the inter-rater agreement, but often it is not achieved. And even if it is not achieved, it's okay as long as the SCVI, the right recommended coefficient is met with. So Lin criteria is used as the guideline for CVI measure. The excellent content validity is judged for individual CVI that meets the Lin's which was Lin's criteria proposed in 1986. The Lin criteria provided widely cited guidelines for what an acceptable ICVI should be in relation to the number of the experts. So for Lin's criteria, it is important how many experts are engaged, and it will vary according to that. So the excellent ICVI with 3 to 5 experts should have an acceptable score of 1. So it's better to engage more experts so that you have more leverage and more room for acceptance. So the excellent ICVI with 6 to 10 experts will be 0.78, and for 6 experts it is determined to be 0.83. Acceptable SCVI average for any number of raters in general would refer to 0.80. And acceptable SCVI universal agreement for any number of rater is 1, which often is difficult to achieve. So if Lin's criteria are not met, it indicates the content not adequately covered in the initial round of experts meeting, and a second pool of experts judgment becomes necessary then. So here I'll take you through an example: content validity index determining SCVI individual and then SCVI. So look at the example here. We have different clusters or different components, right? 3 components is and they are so in 15 items with 5 items in each cluster of the component of the factor, and then the rater use are 6 in number. So say rater 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 have rated on a 4-point Likert scale from 1 to 4. So what we look at this is towards the last column on the right, the second last column on the right, we look at the agreement. And agreement is met with if the raters rate this item 3 or 4. So 3 and 4 is considered as an agreement. Right. So if you look at the first item, 4, 4, 3, 4 and 3, so 5 are considered in agreement. In item 2, 6 are in agreement because all have rated either 3 and 4, and so is the other 2 items. And the last 2 items, the last item, if you look at, then 4 have agreed to give 4, right? Even if 3 also would have considered in agreement, but since other 2, rater 1 and rater 3 has given 2 each, so this would be considered 4 on a Likert scale in agreement. So what we do is that each agreement is divided by number of the raters. So that will determine the ICVI. So for example, in the right second column, second last column, 5 are in agreement, having given the rating is, on a 4-point like a scale of 3 or 4. So 5 are in agreement, divided by 6 is 0.83. For this item, ICVI is 0.83. So similarly for 6, item number 2, 6 are in agreement, 6 divided by 6 is 1. So ICVI is 1. Similarly, we calculate for all the items here, right? And this all, an average of this all would be the scale CVI average. So all the ICVI added up and divided by number of the items will determine SCVI or the scale CVI, right? So this here has been determined to be 0.89. But then later for the SCVI universal agreement, so that is SCVI average 0.89, but to determine the SCVI universal agreement, what we do is we look at the total agreement. So if you look at in the cluster 1 or the component 1, the total agreement, which means the 6, right? Everybody given either 3 or 4. So those are 3 or 4 will be considered. How many? Because 6 letters are used. So if it is 6, that all 6 have been in agreement by giving on a Likert scale 4-point Likert scale, either giving 3 or 4. So if you look at here, 6, 6, 6, 3, 6, and these 3, 6 determine the total agreement. Others are not in total agreement, they are less than 6. So this total agreement divided by the total number of the items. So here are 6. So 3 divided by 6 is 0.5. Which is universal agreement, so 0.50. It's considered less because the very strict list criteria applies to universal agreement, which should have been 1. So nevertheless, the SCVI and ICVI, when we look at, is achieving the target, which is more than 0.80. So this for this construct, all the items have achieved that, and it's above 0.89. So we will accept all these items. Similarly, looking at the factor or the component 2, the SCVI or the scale CVI average is 0.94, is also acceptable, more than 0.80, and in last one is 0.86, so it's also acceptable, right? So this is how you calculate the content validity index, and I have demonstrated that on an Excel sheet. Data was produced, and then I did it together with you, if you remember. So this is how calculated, and you are provided with the data now. Having gone through this voiceover recorded lecture, then you can do it yourself. In any issue that you have, please contact me on LMS. Okay, so this is content validity index interpretation. I have actually done it, and for your purpose of calculating the content validity index, I have done already. And keeping with the demonstration, if you can recall, because incidentally I was told that the session couldn't be recorded for some technical reasons, so that's why I'm spending some time to produce this voiceover lecture, so that the data that you have, you can calculate and get guided by some of these slides that I have elaborated here now for you. So the Linz criteria, in interpretation, we have to follow the Linz criteria. So the Linz criteria advocate that when there are 5 or few experts, the ICVI must be 1. So less the number of the experts you engage, so you are at disadvantageous position. So it's better to involve at least 6 experts. So one, that is, all experts must agree if you are engaging 5 or less. Okay, less than 5 is not really acceptable, so at least should be minimum 5, but it's better for you to engage more than 5. then you will have more leverage in Linz criteria. So when there are more than 5 experts, there can be a modest amount of the disagreement, e.g. when there are 6 experts, the ICVI must be at least 0.83, allowing one disagreement. Davis 1992 states that a new instrument should have an average CVI average of 0.8 agreement among the raters, any number of the raters, he says. So that is another way you can refer to Davis propose this idea in 1992. So, but in interpretation, you must also refer, are you referring to Linz criteria or a modification by Davis? That is important for the journal admin and also for the readers. So as for the scale level content validity is concerned, it is defined as the proportion of the items on an instrument that achieves a rating of 3 or 4 by all the content experts. So the scale or the SCVI universal agreement calculation mentioned is overly stringent, is very stringent, and acceptable values for SCVI UA becomes more difficult to achieve as the number of experts increases. So there, the less the number, there are more chances. So more number, their disagreement chance is more. And once disagreement is there, the SCVI universal agreement will be less than 1 and is not acceptable. So drawing a conclusion and content validity index, the content validity index or CVI is critical early step in enhancing the construct validity of an instrument, and it has the ease of computation and understandability, focus on agreement of relevance rather than agreement per se. It focus on consensus rather than consistency, has provision for both item and scale information, and has the weakness of failure to adjust for chance agreement. So having done with the content validity index to determine the item's relevancy to the construct, we move on to look for the reliability. So once the content validity index and principal component analysis has been done, items are fine-tuned and constructs are reviewed for what it has been originally designed by the researcher or what the principal component analysis has developed. So that part is done, and then the questionnaire is ready for the pilot studies. From here, from the data collected from the pilot study, I will give you some of the steps and some of the alerts that would be important for you to remember. So now here we take, here if you can look at, on the left hand side in yellow is the question of the items. So you have to now, and on the right side is the responses in a pilot study. So the data collection and the coding, step 1 would be the before you do the coding to change it into numbers. So from the qualitative data you make it to quantitative data. Reverse coding and the raw data with numeric values in Excel is very, very important. So you carefully look into the items and define the item for its positive and negative connotation, and mark them as normal for positive connotation and item R for the negative connotations. Why? Because if it is negatively connotated, then in that case the fully agreed would be 1 instead of 4. Normally we have fully agreed start 4, agreed 3, disagreed 2, and completely disagreed will be 1. But if items are negatively connotated, then you should take care of converting into numerics. You should allocate or assign in a negatively connotated statement or the items, you will assign 1 to fully agreed, 2 to agreed, 3 to disagreed, and 4 to fully disagreed. This is very important, otherwise you will have a very unlikely results that you may not be expecting. So after coding being done on the data collected, the next step is the cleaning the data of unengaged respondents in scale. This is very important, and it's very simple method. You can still do it in Excel, that you determine as shown here on the right hand column of this. You determine the standard deviation, right, of all the respondents response. You do the standard deviation, and you look for the standard deviation. So if standard deviation, if somebody has been unengaged, uncommitted, and has chosen, because when you administer the questionnaire, often we'll give some awards, coffee, or some other incentive. Those who will complete will get something in return. So and people do not want to read the items, and they will simply pick up 3 or 4. Usually is 3 or 2 is picked up, and they will give it to all the items that number. So these are the uncommitted or unengaged respondents, and it should be removed from the data. So simple way is to calculate the standard deviation, and if you find the standard deviation is not calculated done, in that case you will find those are the respondents who were uncommitted or engaged, and then you will remove them from your list. It's better to remove them, otherwise there will be some bias in your study results later. So at this point, you transfer the data from Excel to SPSS to cater for the missing values, which is very easy to do it in SPSS, and perform the data cleaning by identifying and replacing those missing values. So converting the data from Excel to SPSS takes just few steps, and very easy steps. But all these steps I didn't demonstrate it in my synchronous session, because that mostly I addressed, and it took over almost 2 hours to explain to you content validity index for all of you to make a good in-depth understanding for that. And I was happy that you all, when you interacted, you have all understood how the content validity index is done for items in a questionnaire. But transfer the coding, and then coding for the reverse coding for the negatively connotated items, then removing the unengaged respondents, and then transferring it to the SPSS. And these are very simple steps that need a demonstration, and if time permits, maybe if the organizer contact me, I can demonstrate those steps if I'm asked to. Next, we look for the reliability. Reliability, we use Cronbach alpha, or the Pearson's correlation coefficients. So alpha is more appropriate for nominal interval data, and it evaluates the extent to which the different item on questionnaire measure the same trait. So item total correlation refers to positive and strong relationship items to items, and items to total score of the item in a test. Pearson's versus Spearman correlation coefficient is decided depending on the normality issues. And then if the normality of distribution assumption is met with Pearson's correlation, as Spearman correlation test is carried out. So once you run the Cronbach alpha in SPSS, you also strike off Cronbach alpha if item deleted would also it depends on the what scale you tick off. So having done all those, but this needs a demonstration. So I would like you to focus on this item total statistics, which will be the output table from the alpha statistics. So on the left hand side, you see the alpha has been determined to be 0.792, which is very good for 10 item questionnaire. But what I would like you to focus is on the most right column, on the cronback alpha if item is deleted. So what you look for here is that, say for example, the cronback alpha is 0.792. You look for each item. If that item is removed, what happens to cronback alpha? If the cronback alpha goes up, then that item is just taking a space and may not be good enough to be kept, and you can consider, but it depends on how much difference does it bring. For example, here the cronback alpha is 0.792. When we remove question 1, it slightly increases, so there's slightly negative impact of this item on overall cronback alpha, but that is very minimal, so it raised little bit. Similarly, item 2, I would say, has gone down. So when we remove, it means that this item is actually contributing a lot, because if we remove that, the cronback alpha will fall here. So some of the item, when we remove, for example, item number 5, the cronback alpha will fall from 0.792 to 0.754. That means this item is contributing more in consistency of the overall item in terms of cronback alpha. So this is an important output in the item total statistics, to see what happens if item is deleted, what happens to the cronback alpha. If it goes up, then that item is actually not contributing and just taking space. The other item where the removing of the item bring the cronback alpha down, then those items are contributing well and should be kept in the questionnaire. So here I'm giving you the cronback alpha coefficient and the interpretation. So more than 0.9 is considered excellent, 0.8 is good, but acceptable should be more than 0.7. 0.6 is questionable, 0.5 is poor, and less than 0.5 is unacceptable. Now this is my last slide, so I thank you all very much for patience listening. Though this is a little difficult, but as content validity index was demonstrated, so if I get a chance to take a workshop with you and explain all these steps, how do you do from the design of the items in a questionnaire, sent out to the experts, then content validity index calculated, then pilot study done, data collected, coding of the data done, reverse coding done, item clear for unengaged, uncommitted subjects, and then missing values, and then bringing it to the SPSS from the Excel data sheet, which are simple steps I can demonstrate and you can learn. But all in all, this is how the content validity index in terms of the validity done, and then construct validity is done by PCA, which is another session we need to be together to learn, and then the reliability partly I have explained, but how do we do it would be when I get a chance to do it and demonstrate with the data that I have provided. But you try do it on the data I provided. If any issue, then you may contact me through the discussion forum. I'll ask Mubashir to create discussion forum so that we can get engaged on that, and I'll help you as much as I can. So thank you very much, and have a good day.